Hyped inflation versus the coming global demographic decline. They say vortex, but no, it's hyped inflation. Change the D with an R, hyperinflation, but it's hyped inflation. I'm telling you. Great article from Zero Hedge. Most central banks are increasingly convinced that high inflation may not be so transient after all, which is why the tightening cycle has now begun. But it's worth reminding oneself that secular demographics are set to reach maximum deflationary pressures in the decade ahead. This is in stark contrast to what happened in the 70s when demographic trends underpinned the inflationary surge. So remember, the 1970s, high energy cost, huge increases in population. Maybe not in the United States because we were in the midst of a baby, I guess that was the back end of the baby bust, but certainly worldwide there was. Remember China, one-child policy? Huge demographic boom, demographic bust now throughout the world. High energy, leads to high inflation. No other way around that. If it costs a lot of money to create a product, that means it costs a lot. That is inflationary because everything revolves around energy cost. If you think they're going to change anytime soon, I got news for you. But at the end of the day, what is going to undermine all this is there's a complete lack of demographics. Older people don't spend as much. That's why they never advertise to older people except for Medicare Advantage because they're not buying new cars, they're not buying drinks, they're not buying new clothes. Older people are they don't consume. They just don't. That's why advertisements are only geared towards younger folks because young people can be convinced by advertisements. Older people can't. The demographic shifts, if it especially gets older, there's going to be economic declines. Absolutely, man. Economic declines combined with higher energy costs leads to stagflation. But what causes inflation is higher energy costs because then people say, I'm going to have to pay more for the producer's product. And then what happens is people say, I can't produce this product. It leads to scarcity, which is runaway inflation right then. It has nothing to do with the M2 money supply. It's just nuts. It's high freaking energy cost with scarcity caused by government policies. High energy costs are caused by government policies. So that is here, and that might go away if we get some sense in the White House. I'm not sure. I think in 2024 we probably will. DeSantis or someone will like that, and that will reduce the high energy costs. Anyway, at the end of the day, though, it's all for naught anyway, because if you don't have enough people, a growing population, there's not going to be enough demand to increase the prices of goods. There just won't be, because as people get old, they just don't buy. So there's not going to be that much production, which is going to kill the economic growth, in my opinion. All right, so let's keep reading this. But amid the current inflationary panic, some guy reminds us that the demographic headwinds facing the major economies are intensifying, especially as people are dropping out of the workforce. In the long term, demographics will be a big shock to the central bank's hopes of higher inflation, 100%. All major economies are suffering from aging demographics. An economy gets a boost in the 25 to 54-year-old age cohort and suffers a drag from the 65 plus age. Older population are correlated with lower growth and lower inflation, 100%. The major economies already stuck in a zero bound, fiscal and monetary authorities will have to contemplate negative interest rates and continued debt-financed fiscal spending. Both options will not reverse economic gravity and erode the standard of living over time. I completely agree with that. I completely agree. You can run interest rates down to the ground if you want. That's not going to get people spending. It's just not going to. We just see what happened in Japan. The same thing's going to. Just not only see what happened in Japan, just see in our America, older people don't spend as much, regardless of what the interest rates are. But they think they can, if we just keep, if we keep the interest rates low, people will borrow and they'll spend and have a high velocity of money. There's no evidence of that. A rising tide lifts all boats. An economy receives a significant boost through the prime age, 25 to 54 population, as this cohort has the highest rate of income and consumption. Yep. Prime age workers buy more homes, vehicles, and durable goods, helping to boost production and employment. Conversely, the economy feels a drag as older demographics comprise a larger share of the total population, particularly as modern economies are structured through heavy transfer payments in the traditional retirement years. By the way, I just want to point something else here. Right here, they'll have to contemplate negative interest rates and continued debt finance. Debt spending is deflationary. Demographics, deflationary. Debt spending, deflationary. High energy is inflationary. That just leads to scarcity, which leads to runaway prices, which means more and more people say, I'm just not going to buy that, whatever that product is. I'm just going to spend everything I can on it and heat my house on my food. That's it. I'm not going to buy these things. It's just so obvious to me. I absolutely could be wrong, but I'm just sitting there thinking this makes sense. So the inflationary components are short term, and they're going to be run like a freaking 46 defense. Remember Wilbur Marshall, Richard Dent, and the boys? The 46 defense against the Patriots in 1986 Super Bowl, 1985 season, 1986 Super Bowl. It's just going to be, you got Tony Eason, Craig James, Stanley Morgan, all those guys kicking butts and taking names, but then they ran into the buzzsaw, the 46. Same thing. Yeah, inflation is like Tony Eason. High energy prices, yeah, without question. Inflation, the deflation demographics. Debt is deflationary without question, and age is deflationary. All right. The next 10 to 15 years will bring a significant demographic drag, not only in Japan, which is the poster child for an aging population, but all through Europe, China, the UK, and US. China. What? China. The global demographic vortex will act as a vacuum, sucking resources from the prime age workers through taxation or debt finance transfers, forcing central banks to hold rates at zero or quickly return after another failed attempt to combat rising inflation. Demographic drag. Charted below, we can see the aging population across major economies of the world. The 65 plus year age group as a percentage of the total population is rising in the 5 largest economies. Let's click on this. So we got 65 percentage right here. So this right here is Japan. Look at that, man. In 2035, Japan, over almost a third of the people in Japan will be over the age of 65. In Japan, back in 1965, was only 6%. Look at that. Here's U.S. 20% of the population in 15 years will be over the age of 65. In our boom boom years, it was less than 10. Here's China. Look at that. Less than 5% of the population is over 65 back in, because they're all killed by Mao, but still back right here. In 2035, it's going to be 20%. And then Europe is, I mean, we're doomed, man. They're doomed in terms of what you think is going to happen relative to historical rates of return. Not going to happen. Despite popular opinion, Japan is not the only country that is suffering the demographic drag. And in fact, over the next 10 years, the major economies of the world will mirror the problems that plague Japan, right? Look at this. 65% of the total population of the median, right? I guess it's the same. The median ex-Japan. That's the major economies. Well, we just kind of did that. Many investors and economic analysts acknowledge the aging demographics and the negative impact on growth and inflation, but are relatively flippant about the importance. Like the analogy of a frog in boiling water, demographics have been impacting every major economy, contributing to subpar economic growth over the last 10 years, with investors and analysts offering dozens of explanations other than the most obvious and forceful economic fundamental. People drive economies. Interest rates don't drive economies. People do, man. People. Take away people. I don't care what your interest rates are. There is no economy relative to what the freaking textbooks say. The chart below shows a 10-year annualized rate of real GDP growth for the United States and the old age population as a percentage of the total. All right, so let's take a look at this. So here's the United States, 65% right here. So we can see 1960. High, low, young population, high growth. This is growth right here. This is percentage of 65. Look at this. It's just going down. It's going to continue to go down because people drive economies. I mean, everyone would think you would know that, man. The demographic drag will not impact economic growth month to month or even year to year. Still, if you're willing to take a longer view, demographics are the most reliable economic fundamental impacting real growth. And that's essential. Let's see. The relationship below shows the old age population on the x-axis. I think that's horizontal. and the 10-year annualized rate of growth on the Y. The 2030 demographic estimate highlights that we should be very much expect real economic growth to converge around 0% by the end of the decade. Here's a 10-year annualized real growth rate. So this is the x-axis. Here's a y, the percentage of demographics getting older. Look, there's a trend right there. The older you get, the less the growth is. The younger you are, you get 4% growth. The older you are, almost like the Big Dipper, you get less than 2. 100%. And there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you can do something about it. Have more babies. I got 4. How many you got? Show your cards. How many babies you got? Put in the show notes. Let's see how many kids you got. How many grandkids? So put in the show notes, kids and grandkids. I want to see. Are they in the double digits? You should have kids and grandkids in the double digits. That's what you should have. And if you don't, look, I'm not chastising. I'm not. I'm just saying at the end, you can do whatever you want to do. At the end of the day, we want people, families to have 3 generations of at least 10 downstream from you. Well, this may sound extreme. Investors are more familiar with the long-term analysis at EPB Macro Research. Know that real GDP per capita is already rapidly converging towards 0 despite unlimited central bank support and fiscal transfers. Yeah, that's real GDP. That's net of inflation. So right here, per capita, 1% net of inflation. As economic growth converges towards 0, the linear relationship between demographics and growth starts to level off. With the help of statistician Ian Fellows, we can plot the relationship between real GDP and the old age population in Japan, the UK, and the United States. Yeah, basically, we're getting the 0%, the 0 growth rate. Aging demographics plaguing all 5 major economies, and it doesn't plague Korea too, by the way, will suck real economic growth down towards 0, forcing central banks to the 0 bound, if not already there, and through 0 bound for those willing to further the experiment of negative interest rates. The recent surge in supply-side inflation is causing panic among global central banks, putting rate hikes back into the near-term equation. That's just going to kill things, man. As with the last several attempts at normalized policy, there will be a quick U-turn back towards the 0 bound as economic gravity continues to pull the real growth rate back down. Demographics is the most influential for inflation if you are willing to accept a longer time frame. The population 15 years and younger depends on parents for support, and the population 65 and older depends on the working age to support them, to produce the goods, to pay the taxes, to basically change their butts. As a result, the age dependency ratio, graphically inversed in the chart below, measures how much pressure there is on the working age population to divert resources toward the young and the old. As the line moves higher in the chart below, the working age population is widening relative to the dependent population, creating robust economic conditions. Particularly today with inflation that resembles 1970s, investors and analysts frantically remembered what caused the 1970s inflation and the similarities to the current situation. In reality, the situation today is much different than then. After the war, there's a baby boom. Fast forward 20 years, and those babies are now entering the prime age cohort of the 1970s, ready to work, consume, and produce. From 1960 to 1985, the U.S. experienced some of the most positive demographics the world has ever seen. Not just the country, the world. If we take the 20-year rolling average and the age dependency ratio and plot it against the long-term rate of inflation, we can see that almost all the long-term inflation trends can be explained through the demographics and a widening or contracting of the share of the population. Over the last 10 years, subpar economic growth and the lackluster rates of inflation have confused policymakers. A global demographic drag is the heart of the problem. The next decade will come with global demographic drag that is far more intense than the last 10 years, not just Japan. The rate of real economic growth will continue to slowly grind towards 0 and pull the long-term rate of inflation with it. Yeah, 100%. The long-term investor should be mindful that these trends and align their portfolio with assets that can survive another low-growth decade. Defensive assets like long-duration treasury bonds are still effective at low levels of interest rates and one part of a diversified portfolio. Yeah, I agree. And I'd say increasing dividends as well. I mean, that's a good hedge against inflation. but it's a good hedge against because fixed income and a deflation is good. Dividends are a hedge against inflation, and dividends are a hedge against deflation because you have an increasing in your dividends. Any kind of fixed income with a potential for increasing is always a good thing. Fixed income works in deflation, not so much in inflation, but deflation does. So that's frightening. And sometimes the zero hedge comments aren't anything worthwhile. So let's just see what we got here. If population goes from say 100 million to 50 million, the dollars in circulation goes from 100 billion to 10. Okay, 10. How is that deflationary? Well, because the population in circulation isn't being cycled. That's called velocity. No velocity, no inflation. And the reason there's no velocity, because people don't want to buy. Inflation rates, interest rates, zero doesn't mean anything. You can print all the money you want. If people aren't spending it, it doesn't matter. All right, love your thoughts. Again, put in the notes how many kids you got and grandkids. We'll see you.